A tale of a brutal ogre, a tale of a deadly sea monster, a tale of 3 noble kingdoms. But what does all that make? Hello and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Show from the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter, and today we're going to be taking a look at this little beauty here. It's Tale of Tales, and it's directed by Matteo Garrone. I think that's how you pronounce it. And this is, it's actually 3 tales sort of wrapped up in one. They coexist in the same universe, is probably the best way of looking at it. And these are actually from Baroque stories from the 17th century. So let's take a look to see how this century has adapted them. Tale of Tales. What is it all about? What's the setup? Well, as I say, it's 3 fairy tales or folk tales that have been written. They were written in the Baroque period of the 17th century, and they were collected by Giambattista, I think that's how you pronounce the name, Giambattista Basile. And in that collection was the early versions, the sort of original versions of Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and also Rapunzel. So they're the more known stories from that collection. These stories, however, from my point of view anyway, I'm not sure if they're well known in other parts of Europe, but they're not really well known, the stories that they covered here. And they are the Enchanted Doe, the Flea, and the Flayed Old Lady. So as you can imagine, the titles are quite evocative in itself, and it's very clever. I didn't know too much about this film before I watched it, but I had seen trailers. We did report it actually on our Fancy News show, and it just looked really intriguing. It looked very a sort of art house film, and very sophisticated, and the stories. And I was intrigued by these stories. I didn't really know at the time whether they were somebody, the director's imagination or a writer's imagination of this century, or if they were adaptations. And so it's interesting to see old stories like Sleeping Beauty, like Rapunzel, being remade, being retold and adapted, and I guess updated or at least created in a format, in a view to the modern audience, because you've got a whole rich back history now of filmmaking. And so obviously as audiences watch more and more films, they're going to become more and more sophisticated with what they would like to see. That said, the stories start off and you get an introduction to each of the stories, and as I said in the little introduction, they don't actually kind of merge into one. You sometimes you would think, yes, that's how a kind of modern way of telling the story would be, is that you would have one character, and and you'd get a little bit of information about that character. Then you'd have another character and their world, and then another character, and then eventually, they'll all come together in some sort of clever plot twist, and it will all be explained and all their lives merge. Not in this case. These are kind of 3 stories that then it's almost like they're twisted together to tell one story, but they don't impede on each other's story, if that makes sense. They do come together slightly at the end, but that's purely because these stories exist in the same universe. So these are 3 kingdoms that, if you like, are sort of next to each other in the land, but they don't really impede on each other's territory, apart from at the end. But it's just kind of a nice device to bring them together. It doesn't actually affect any of the stories individually. As you can imagine, there's some deep underlying themes in these stories. In the Enchanted Doe, we have blind desire, and that's what I like about these fairy tales. That's why I was always drawn to fairy tales, because there's some sort of hidden message. Now, you could argue, well, it's not really there, it's what you bring to it. And I think that's a big part of it, of reading and watching fairy tales, and pretty much anything. You bring, each audience member will bring something of themselves into what they watch, and then get that interpretation back again. So for me, there was definitely a sense of blind desire, and also jealousy running through this. And it's how far would you go to get what you are passionate about, what you really, really desire. And we're talking here a real human biological need. This is a mother wanting a child. It's a queen wanting a child, and a king as well. So they're obsessed. They start becoming obsessed by having a child. They want a child, and then it's like, well, but at what price? What cost? Now you can imagine it's a fairy tale. There's always a cost involved certainly if there's magic, and that is the case. I don't want to spoil it for you, but you can just see this kind of blind desire taking over. You can see how it can corrupt. It corrupts the soul. It kind of corrupts the mind, and therefore you just become obsessed by it. Now, the obsession theme, that mirrors the next story, which is the Flea. And that's a very, very bizarre story. Again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but the obsession is the focal point. And again, it's that obsession, is almost blind obsession. What do you shut out for the rest, in your life? If you become obsessed with one, maybe two things in your life, what are you missing out on? What is the other things, the other elements in your life? So, for example, your friends and your family. So in this case, the king of the Second Kingdom, he becomes obsessed with this flea to the detriment, really, of his family life. And there's a beautiful twist in this. There's lovely little twists along the way. So again, I don't want to spoil this for you. So there's that obsession, and again, it shows the consequences of your actions. And that's again why I love fairy tales, because there's always a payoff. Your actions will have consequences. And the third story is, again, it's a very bizarre story, the Flayed Old Lady. And that again has the themes of desire, obsession, and also lust. So there's a lust coming into those two other themes as well, that then makes the concoction of that even more dangerous. Mixing that with the look at aging, that's another theme, being youthful and growing old, and that kind of almost that feeling of, I can't accept my age. I am constantly now starting to look back at my youth and that longing. And so this is about two sisters who are elderly, and they want that. They want to be beautiful again. They want to look recreate their youth. Now, of course, this is the 17th century. We're still doing that. There is the big industry, the beauty industry, about aging creams. You can roll back the years and get rid of the wrinkles. Still relevant there. They try things a little bit more macabre than just putting aging cream on. I don't really again spoil the story. So you've got all the themes kind of mixed up. You've got there's of course the loyalty again. What is the cost involved if you become obsessed and desire? And maybe, I guess, it's an obsession and desire the wrong things. Maybe being obsessed and desire and passionate about something in itself is fine, but it's what is the object of your passion, of your desire. That's the dangerous thing. And also, how far will you go, and can you control it? Like, I know I could get personally obsessed with chocolate. Absolutely love it. But of course, there's got to be a limit on it. Although at Christmas, I did eat a whole bar of Toblerone, the big one, in one go. But then I felt very remorseful. I felt a bit sick. So yes, again, the consequences, your actions will have consequences. Now, as you can imagine, the fantasy element in this is all over the place. It's beautiful. You are bang in the centre of folk tales, of storytelling, and it's not flashy. This film allows you to breathe in each scene. It's not an action-packed, Conan the Barbarian, sword and sorcery type film. It's one of those, it's a story. The main focus are on the characters and what their consequences are, and their friendships and their decision-making. And there's beautiful fairy tale moments in there. There's an ogre, there's a sea monster, there's strange creatures. But on top of that, and also I guess more importantly, there's dark magic involved as well. But all of that is to serve the characters and what they desire and what their actions are. It's not about the flashy graphics or the CGI or the, wow, look at that, there's a monster, let's just put two monsters fighting just for the sake of it. No, it actually serves the story and the characters, and that is exactly how fantasy should work. I've just seen A Monster Calls, and we did a book review of that as well, so I saw the film adaptation. And it's that kind of thing. It's how fantasy serves the story rather than, let's put in CGI and just put that in, because, wouldn't it be cool to have two creatures fighting, for example? Or wouldn't it be cool just to have a battle with magic, two wizards, battling it out? No, it has to mean something. You have to, as an audience member, you have to connect emotionally to the characters. And I can safely say you do in this. You really start to care about the characters. Even the ones that you sort of morally may not agree with, you can see their plight. You can see why they've gone down that road. So that is intriguing because you're still connected to them. You kind of want to know, I guess you want a bit of justice then, don't you? And so the overall effect of this film is that it really does submerge you in this very strange kingdoms. There's these three stories, very weird, very bizarre, but you're connected and you feel very immersed in them. And overall, I absolutely adored this film. It was beautiful. There was the production values are very, very high. It looks beautiful. It looks stunning. Everything is just right. The colours, the backgrounds that they choose. Apparently, it was all filmed on location. They didn't use any studios, but they wanted to create a sort of a familiarity. So yes, there's castles, yes, there's woods, but they've done it in a slightly different way. It feels very familiar, and I think that's important because you need to know that you belong in this kind of universe. That I know this world. It's the fairy tale world. But in order for them to then put in these macabre and bizarre stories, because there's some really strange things that happen in this. Because you're already in a familiar territory, you feel safe watching it in terms of it. They then push the boundaries. So I really, really adored it. It's very adult in theme, but again, they don't go too far. I didn't sort of think, oh God, that's disgusting, and that kind of destroyed the storytelling aspect for me. I absolutely thought they got it just the balance right when pushing those bizarre boundaries and letting us into this very strange and macabre world. And I really enjoyed the stories, and that's what I like about going back to let's have a look at the less common stories, the folk tales that are out there. And there's quite a lot out there. Obviously, you've got all the known ones like Rapunzel, Sleeping Beauty, Rumpelstiltskin. But what about all the other little ones that are there? And what you then find is, yes, the fairy tales and folklore for children is actually, back in the day, 200, 300 years ago, very grim, very adult, but they were considered safe enough, or whatever, to tell to children. So that was an interesting aspect. So I feel like, as an adult, looking back at these, probably pure interpretations, you don't need to elaborate too much. Let's not water it down. There's nothing wrong with that. Disney have done a fantastic job of spreading the word, and entertaining children with their folk tales. But they've done it in a Disney way. They water it down. These don't. This is brutal. This is gritty. It's a grim reality world. So you can definitely believe that these, even though there's magic there, even though there's sea monsters, it's done in a way that's reality. You feel like, yes, these genuinely could exist. It'd be like exactly, if we got actual proof that the Loch Ness Monster existed, it's kind of like, oh, okay, it does exist. It is real. And that they conveyed that beautifully. So that is half the battle when you're creating fantasy, is you need to convince the audience that this actually takes place, that what we're telling you is real. And especially with dark magic or any magic in fantasy, they don't have to explain it, but it still has to have its own set of rules, and it does in this. So it's beautiful, this film. It reminded me of Pan's Labyrinth, of that sort of quality. It's very sophisticated storytelling, and it also reminded me of Where the Wild Things Are as well, in the terms of it just seems right, which isn't very well a way of explaining it, but it just feels like, yeah, this is real, even though it's fantasy. And for me, you can't get higher praise if you're trying to create something that's fantasy, that people actually invest in it and get emotionally caught up in it. And that, to me, is exactly what you do. A Tale of Tales. Tale of Tales. Yes, what I didn't mention, though, is the acting. The acting is superb, especially Toby Jones. Always gives a good performance, very convincing, just a beautiful performance. There we go. The other thing I didn't say is it actually felt like I was reading the stories, which is very strange because I was watching them, but it felt like I was actually reading the words from the page. And I definitely now want to go and read them just to see, if they missed anything out, how did they change them. Absolutely love this. I would definitely recommend Tale of Tales.